Yeah, and I want to get into the motivation of different breeds and stuff like that. But firstly, most podcasts I like to start the same, just for me and as well as anybody listening. I mean, we met in the sauna 2 weeks ago, and you were saying did you ever make that GIF or the reel?
Not yet.
No?
Not yet. It's in the queue.
Yeah, you had a hilarious dog training reel that I think has serious potential to go viral. I thought it was funny, so we started talking, and here we are. But I don't have like the deepest understanding of your story. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't, given the circumstances that we've only met a few times. But if you could get into like the way I frame it is, how'd you get from where you were to where you are now? Lila, no, come here.
Yeah, give her something else to do, and then just make her do that.
Lay. See, this is. I think this is perfect. For those listening, Lila, my brother's dog, is going to be a perfect example of why Nick's going on.
So here's a situation in which you basically have no leverage.
Mm.
Like, you don't have a leash on, you don't have a treat, you don't have a ball. You have nothing that she wants, and you don't have a way to make her do what you're telling her to do. So every time that you say lay down and she doesn't, she's like, okay, that's an option. If he says it, it's an option. It's optional. Now, she's a nice dog, and a lot of times, probably enough times for it to be functional, she'll be like, okay, I'll lay down. Ideally, when we're starting the training process, we bake in an understanding or a relationship that, hey, when I tell you to do something, you're obliged to do it. We motivate first, and this is, I appreciate you asking about my story now. Let me just wrap this up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because this is an important concept for people to understand, I think, in the space of dog training today, is that I want to bake in this sense of obligation early on, but only after I've motivated the dog to do something. So anybody can pick up a leash and start making your dog do stuff, like giving them pressure to sit, giving them pressure to lay down, popping on the leash for doing bad stuff. Ideally, though, a more, understanding option, or like a more effective route, I think, is using whatever the dog is motivated by. Let's say it's the ball, in order to get her to sit, let's say. Every time she sits, she gets the ball, or it's a treat. Every time they sit, they get a treat, right? And pretty soon, once they get the repetitions going, they know, okay, this is what's expected of me. And then I would layer in something like leash pressure or an e-collar that basically says, hey, now that you're already very fluent in this thing, you have a clear understanding of what's being asked. Now I'm gonna, this is kind of a separate conversation about how to enforce a pressure system. It's really a communication system for dogs or animals, really. In horse training, they do this a lot with the head halties. Like, hey, I give you pressure this way and you follow it, right? And we can do a similar thing with the dogs when we say, hey, when I pull pressure down on the leash, that means lay down. And so now not only are you motivated to do it, but you're obliged by the leash to do what I say. Sure. And if we can stay on top of that early enough, the dog just understands that it's obligated, that that they have to do it.
Look at her.
Yeah, if she has access to it, she'll get it.
Should I zip that up, you think?
Yeah, zip it up.
This is perfect. I love it. I think this is great.
Yeah. And she knows it's in there, obviously. So just to finish that up, like, it's ideally we motivate first, we obligate later. But the combination of both of those things creates a dog who is much more in tune with you and much more obedient.
Sure.
Generally.
And I want to set the scene, like I said, for anybody that's listening. So we're out in the park. I brought my brother's dog. Was playing with the ball before, and I think this is perfect because now you have stuff to talk about, and there's an example right here. She's running around, now she's looking for the ball. Yeah. And that's a perfect segue into what you were just talking about.
Yes. And there's a concept that ties in perfectly here. It's actually the name of a dog trainer's company, but it's Say It Once Dog Training. The idea is that you say a command or you give direction once, and then you enforce it. You reinforce it. Either positively reinforce it with a treat or a ball or a toy, or negatively reinforce it with the leash, which is what I was talking about with the leash pressure. It's classically what we think of as negative reinforcement. Like I take away something to make a behavior more likely. I'm taking away the pressure. Once you sit, the pressure turns off, and that's kind of the foundation of that system. But I won't get too deep into that rabbit hole just yet.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of parenting. Obviously, I'm not a parent, but like when a kid does something, it's not a leash pressure per se, but you apply some sort of pressure. Yeah, I mean, I guess depending on how you parent, yeah, you can use a leash, but a parent applies some sort of pressure, whether it be like the threat of grounding or some punishment, or they can reward. So it's kind of like a similar dynamic, obviously different tools because it's a dog and not a child, but it's pretty interesting to see the behavioral similarities, I feel.
Oh, there's a ton, and that's often a good place for me to relay my information to parents who have an easy time disciplining their child, but for whatever reason a harder time telling their golden doodle not to jump on people. They're just like so sweet to the dog, then the kid is bad mouthing them or making a scene, and they'll turn it on really quickly. And I'm like, hey, take that same energy and just apply it here to the dog, and they're gonna appreciate that. So I guess I've already given a little bit of a spoiler that I am for anybody who's curious or knowledgeable about dog training, I guess I would call it a balanced trainer. There's obviously many different styles of training, purely positive. There's a whole spectrum of, basically you can think about it like the operant conditioning quadrants. Like the purely positive groups will only use positive reinforcement.
Okay.
And so I think that's actually a bit of a misnomer. It's kind of impossible to not, like if you put a leash on a dog and they're blocked, like they can't access things, you're doing some sort of, there's pressure on them, they're feeling some sort of negative reinforcement. So I won't get into that now, but I will say that, a disclaimer, I try and use all four quadrants of the operant conditioning system, just depending on what's best for the dog that's in front of me.
Well, even that's an interesting insight, because I guess intuitively I understand that there's probably trainers that operate with certain principles and stuff, but I'm just about as novice as you can be in dog training.
Yeah.
I've never had a dog. I've never been a dog trainer. I've never spoken to a dog trainer about dog training.
Go.
So even knowing that there's different schools of thought, which makes sense, but knowing what they are, it's like, okay, positive, balanced, negative. Is there specifically negative people that like try
I wouldn't say
messed up?
Yeah, but that's no one. I don't think would come outright and say that. There are still people that do train like that.
Yeah.
That has, it's easier almost if you look at the full context of the history of dog training, which started very much so like with the Keeler method, which you obviously won't know. So the Keeler method is the most popular dog training book of all time. That's by a guy, I think his name is Stephen Keeler, or whatever. His last name is Keeler, and his whole method, I want to say, really established in the 60s or 70s. I could be wrong on that, but that is much more we consider like traditional training that has nothing to do with treats and positive reinforcement, everything to do with a leash and like, hey, do what I say. And there are obviously smart ways to get a dog to do what you say, and it has a lot to do with basically pay attention to me, I have a leash on you and you're gonna listen.
Yeah.
And for some dogs that will work just fine. Like German Shepherds often respond very nicely to that level of training, but there's a lot of fallout.
Sure.
A lot of dogs don't need that level of it's just not a very nuanced and it's just not a good way to go about things, in my opinion. We have a lot more understanding and information about the best way to get a concept through to a dog nowadays.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. I don't know how old that method is, but given the context of it sounds like it's a pretty old method. Like maybe given the context of when, because let me back up. I think dogs have assumed a much different position in society today than they did even, like, if you ask my dad, even like 5, 10, 20 years ago, like for example, my dad and my mom had a dog in college, and it wasn't like one of those things where you invite them over and then it's just assumed that their dog comes. Like nowadays, it's almost assumed like, hey, you have a dog that's very well known in your social group, and the dog, like it doesn't even need to be asked most of the time that the dog's gonna come. So it's just interesting how the dynamic has changed as it relates to dogs and humans in society. I feel like they're much more acclimated and, for lack of a better term, much more treated much more like humans almost.
Sure.
Which I'm sure has had an impact in the training.
Definitely.
Thought and philosophy.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I have lots of business. Because you're absolutely right. They've been assimilated into our society nowadays in ways that are much different than they used to be. Like when I was growing up, a few people had dogs.
Come here.
But they would mostly, stay outside or just kind of be in the house. And now it's like they are truly.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. That's fine. I would say people are a bit more attached to their dogs nowadays, a bit more, which I totally understand. Like I said, I have 3 of my own, and I love them to death. I want to take them places and experience the world with me, but it's probably what you're seeing now is probably like a pendulum swing, where I think for a lot of people and a lot of dogs, it's going a little bit overboard, like especially with kind of a lot of I think a little bit of overbreeding going on, and basically, a lot of dogs don't need to be necessarily exposed to all of the things that they're being exposed to, and a lot of people are finding they have fallout with their dog, not adapting or adjusting really well to what we're asking of them, and
like right now.
Yeah, she's still in.
Here, I don't mean to interject, but here's the legit question for you. Let me think about how to frame this. So for me, like in college, in baseball, in pitching specifically, I was a pitcher, and I had I researched pitching. I spent 90% of my waking hours watching videos, learning about pitching and the movements and all this stuff. So in the context of pitching, I would look at people doing certain things and think things in my head like, oh, he shouldn't be doing that, or oh no, they don't. Oh, good job. Well, that was really good.
Yeah.
Do you do that with dogs? Like in this exact moment that just happened when Lila came over here, were you sitting there thinking, oh, he just did something wrong?
No, I mean, I'm trying to let you do your thing, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, but you obviously have so much more knowledge. Yeah, you have so much more knowledge.
I think that's a great question, because I run all the time on Lady Bird Lake, and on that trail there, pretty much everybody is, I would say, not walking their dog in a manner that is optimal. Like, their dog is walking them.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for me sometimes to turn off my dog trainer switch.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'll go up to people and say, hey, I see you're struggling a little bit. Can I help you out? I'm a dog trainer. A lot of times they're like, no, it's fine. He's good. It's fine. It's cool.
It's like an ego attack.
Yeah, it's like, well, especially if I catch them off guard and they're already a little bit stressed out, I'm just understanding, okay, like, that's fine. If you want to help, I'm here. I do just try to help people out, but yes. It's tough for me not to be like, ooh, don't do that. That's exactly what you don't want to be doing. Is telling your German Shepherd it's gonna be okay while he's pulling on a harness and trying to bite somebody. Like it's like, no,
that's not okay.
That's actually a lot of what I see is people are unconsciously doing things that in protection dog circles is done intentionally to motivate the dog and to turn up their level of frustration, so that they have more drive and energy to go and bite somebody. And I'm like, that's exactly what you're doing. You're letting them pull through a harness, letting them get a little bit closer. They're frustrated. They're ramped up. You're telling them, oh, it's okay. It's okay. You're just like feeding that energy, that drive. So, yeah.
I'm so excited for this conversation. If you can't tell, there's just I feel like there's so many layers to it. On the specifics of dog training, and then also the fascination that I have with dogs in general and how we companionize one another over time. I'm just excited. But before we get any deeper into that, if you want to go into your story, how did you get into dog training? What was it about dogs that, if anything, that were you always drawn to it? You can start however back you want to.
Yeah. So. I think with most dog training professionals or people that find themselves in this industry, it usually has its roots somewhere pretty early on. And so I've always been kind of naturally drawn to my dogs growing up. And, you know, I had one dog, Guinness, who was, I think he was our first dog. We must have got him when I was 8 years old. And then we would get a second dog, and I swear we just had this like revolving door of the second dog, where I probably had some subconscious desire to train them because I knew it was possible. But at that time there was really dog training wasn't really a thing too much. It's just right around when the dog whisperer started coming on. But anyways, our second dog would always like run away or chew on stuff too much, or, you know, just be a problem behaviorally, or, you know, whatever it was. We must have went through like 5 or 6 second dogs, while Guinness remained like the one solid rescue dog that we had. So maybe there's some desire there baked in to like, if I could just communicate with them better, maybe they'd stick around. Maybe I'd not have to say goodbye to,
maybe it's not on them,
to, you know, Eli and Bridie and all these dogs that we had. So that's, I'd say, where it started, but it really got solidified when I was in high school. My mom got this golden retriever puppy named Elsa, and this is a bit of a tragic story, spoiler alert, but she was like, we probably got her 3 months old. By the time she was 4 months old, I was like just so into this dog. Like, this dog was happy-go-lucky and fun and playful and perfect golden retriever. Like, hard to beat that dog too. And I had this, you know, desire to train her, and now that I was a little bit older, I was doing my own research. I was reading Cesar Millan books, I was watching videos, I was trying different dog training stuff. And every day when I would get home from school, she'd be waiting for me at the back door of the backyard, and we'd just play, and, you know, I'd pet her. And, this dog would go crazy for music. If you turned music on, she would just start like going crazy. It was the wildest thing. It could even be like a ringtone on your phone.
I've never heard of a dog doing that.
It was crazy, man.
That's so cool.
I'm sure it was some sort of like soul connection with this dog, because like I could literally just start playing ringtones on my phone, and she would just go crazy happy with any music that was on. And then one day I came home from school and she wasn't at the back door. Long story short, she got herself caught in a volleyball net in the backyard, hung herself. I was the one that found her, like rushed her to the vet. She didn't make it. She was dead by the time I got home. And so from that point I was like, all right, I want to be a vet. I want to be a veterinarian. I want to help dogs. You know, it was this like altruistic, I'm going to be the hero and, you know, give back. And so I got my first job working at a kennel out in Houston. That was a boarding facility for people who would go on vacation and leave their dogs at this facility. And I worked there for probably 5 or 6 months, and to this day it was one of the worst jobs I've ever had. And it turned me off to the dog training community almost entirely, to the industry. And it was just very much so a numbers oriented, like business driven company. So there was like me and one other person in charge of caring for like 30, 40, 50 dogs. There were times during like, you know, winter break or spring break where there would be up to like 80 to 100 dogs at the facility and like 4 people to care for them. It's like, it's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough. And basically our day was, it was turnout, but basically we just bring the dog from a little kennel inside to a potty run outside and then put him back. And that was their day.
Yeah.
And like, that just sucks for me and for the dogs. And it was really tough. So that turned me off to dog training and dog stuff altogether. I was always they did have a dog training section of that facility. I was always like, piqued my curiosity. Thought it was much cooler and probably more fun than the job that I was doing. And so for a while I kind of just put it off to the side, and I was off in college and studying to do physical therapy. That was like the track that I was on. I grew up playing sports, and I'm pretty active in my own physical hobbies, and so that was, you know, a fun thing for me to do. But it became very clear to me around like my junior year of college, I didn't actually want to be a physical therapist. That was just the story I was telling my friends and family to kind of get them like oh, okay, Nick's gonna be fine. He's pursuing a career in physical therapy.
Whereas if you told him I'm gonna be like a dog trainer, like, dude, you need help.
Yeah, I was at the University of Texas, and you know, I felt like I needed to pick something worthy of my time, and you know, that was gonna be a nice professional career for me. But I was never a big like school guy,
Yeah.
or you know, I eventually, you know, tried and did pretty well at it, but I was always thinking kind of outside of the box. Never wanted to do like a 9-to-5 gig, and so I found myself, long story somewhat short, I found myself graduating in the year of 2020, which got cut short by COVID. So I went home to live with my mom in Houston, and all of a sudden I found myself graduated from school with no real plan. Like, I knew it wasn't physical therapy, but I had no idea what I was going to do. So I was debating a few different things. I was kind of weighing my options. Talking to a guy in medical sales, thought that might be for me. I, you know, was thinking about being a personal trainer and getting into that area of things. And I also had this dog trainer thing that I was considering. That was like the lowest on my list. I was just like, I don't know, I kind of like that. So I kind of put that away. And during quarantine, man, I'll be honest, it was like a pretty dark period of my life where it wasn't the darkest ever, but I was certainly stuck in a rut in terms of my habits, my environment, like my mental space was in a very low place. Like back in 2020, of course, everything shut down, and I'm sure a lot of people went through something similar, but I was drinking during the day, and bro, I don't drink like at all. Like,
that's usually an indicator. If you're not a big drinker, or maybe even if you are, if you find yourself drinking at like non-social hours, it might be like a time that you know what, maybe something's going on.
There was a few wake-up calls. I was also eating edibles and like smoking at night. I was really just distracting myself, numbing something, and so I knew that I needed to fucking shake it up and really just get out of town. And so as soon as my first unemployment check hit my bank account, I was like, yo, I'm out of here. I packed up all my stuff into my car, and I drove from Houston to, my first stop was here in Austin, ended up going all the way out to the West Coast. It was a big soul-searching road trip. I was like, okay, I need to figure out what I'm gonna do with my life. Like, I just need one thing to point at so that I can focus my energy there. And that was really my intention for the trip. And so I had ideas of myself, you know, being out in nature and meditating and being isolated and doing lots of journaling. And pretty quickly I realized that wasn't how my trip was gonna go. I left from Houston. My first stop was here in Austin, and it was like the second or the third night I reconnected with this girl. I fell in love. I got this divine epiphany that what I wanted to do with my life was to be a dog trainer. And that came to me like in a moment of gratitude, I would say. It was like a divine intervention for me, because that was the intention of my whole trip, right? Was to figure out, okay, what am I gonna do? And within a few days, I had my answer. And it wasn't like I had to go looking for it. It was like, oh, it was right in front of my face the whole time. Like, of course, I'm gonna be a dog trainer. That's what I love to do. I'm passionate about it. I love working with people. I love working with dogs. I get a lot out of teaching other people about their dogs. It's very fulfilling for me. It's very, like, when I see teachers talk about this all the time, like teachers of any discipline, it's really rewarding to see somebody really grasp and understand the concept. And that's really what drives me to still do it to this day. But that's a little bit of the how it came to be, was kind of the soul-searching road trip, and a very clear answer, or a calling rather, from the universe that was like, hey, this is what you're gonna do. And it felt so relieving. It's like this big weight off my shoulders. I was crying, I was laughing. I was like, oh my God, I know what I'm gonna do. This girl's like, okay, great.
That's remarkable to me, because I think a lot of people will go on that trip. You mentioned a word that I think is so important, the intention. Like, that you had that intention with the trip. And in a completely side note, I've never taken shrooms or anything like that, but I've heard that people, when they have a specific intention on trips, it's ironic that that's the same word, but when they have a specific intention on a trip, the result is typically so much more clear and better and stuff like that, as opposed to just tripping for no reason, or driving across the country tripping for no reason. You had an intention, reason that you were going. So I don't think it's a coincidence that that intention was met with a divine intervention where you said, you know what, wow, this is, and I can only imagine the moment. Jordan Peterson, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yep.
He talks about having an aim and a vision and aiming like at your highest and most, like just the highest version of yourself, having that aim, because then everything else sort of, like you mentioned, all your energy and your focus can actually be funneled into something instead of just this chaotic world.
Right.
But it is interesting to hear after college when you went home, living with your parents, because I relate to that. I lived with my parents after college for a little bit, and it was definitely, I found myself in a rut, and I did pretty much the exact same thing where I not the exact same thing, but I took a job in Tampa like very like a week after I even found out about it. Didn't know anybody down there except like one or two high school buddies, and immediately when I went down there I was like, okay, this is the right decision. I don't really even like what I'm doing, but like I needed to get out of there. I needed to change my environment up. I needed to change my cues, everything that was going on, and it was a massive momentum builder in my life. So it's not surprising to hear that was something that you did and it worked for you as well.
Yeah, I've heard that it's the fastest way to change someone's behavior is to change their environment. And I find that's true for dogs as well. I'm probably going to relate almost everything that I say to dog training. But it's interesting you said that about the shrooms, because I brought shrooms with me on that road trip thinking that was going to like be my time to figure it out. And this girl actually took me through a cacao ceremony, which I'd never done before. I was like, all right, what is this, like chocolate milk? And we're like, okay, we're drinking it with intention, all right. And that was enough to just like, I think it was also just the act of doing something with a lot of intention that I hadn't really explored doing that before. Like, okay, this is a ceremony. We're doing this like with intention. It's like, okay. And it just brought me into a space where I think I was, able to receive the message that was already there for me. Just getting myself into a loving state of mind.
And well, just to add something to that kind of just crossed my mind. You talk about when you were in Houston in that rut per se, you were distracting yourself, which when you dive into that, distracting yourself from what? Something within, maybe an answer that you're searching for. So once again, it's not surprising to me at all that when you removed yourself from the environment with those distractions, and to bring up the word again, became intentional about what you were looking for, or almost intentional about what you were removing as well. It kind of clarifies the ether, like the ether, and you can receive that message, whatever it is for anybody, but for you it was this, oh my gosh, I know now. Maybe it's literally as simple as just removing those distractions for a period of time that allows you to get to the baseline and then open up your receptiveness to whatever it is that God's trying to tell you. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, man, I found that was definitely the case. And when I was on that road trip, it was so easy to not be distracted because I was just out in the wilderness. Like every place that I stayed I was like completely going on my intuition of like, oh, okay, I'm gonna head to Sedona. I'm like, oh, meet these group of people, they want to go to the Grand Canyon. I was like, sure. It was just kind of being like the yes man attitude.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. And it was, yeah, like I said, just so easy to not be distracted once I had that weight lifted off of my shoulders. Like I didn't feel like I needed to figure something out. I was just going to have fun after that. But yeah, so nice to be out. And before we were recording, I mentioned like I want to get off the grid for a little bit. That was Lila.
Was that the wrong thing to do?
No, it's fine. I just in
I'm
case
sitting
they're
here
just
like, wait,
listening.
what does he want me to do right now?
In case they're just listening, you didn't just yell no at me. It was at the dog.
Yeah, no, you didn't do that.
But man, one thing you mentioned about Jordan Peterson, I'm actually doing a series on my Instagram for his 12 rules for life. I'm doing a 12 rules for dog training.
Very cool.
And just taking each one of his rules. Because like, man, this applies to dog training. Just tweaking it a little bit. And For example, one of my favorite ones is like, I think it's rule 5 or 6. Don't let your kids do something that's gonna make you resent them.
Yeah.
And same for don't let your dogs do something that's gonna make you not like them. Like at a certain point, you gotta stop their behavior, even though you're loving them and you want them to, do their thing. If they're like bugging guests when they come over, and you're like subconsciously like on edge about it, fix it. Like don't let your dog do that. Make them make right decisions so that you can love them more. So he's also got this concept that you mentioned, striving for your ideal self. Something that I've been tuning into recently is the two-pronged approach to that, where you're like striving towards something greater, but also running away from something lesser. And there was I'm not sure if you're familiar with the rat study, where they
wafted the cheese.
Cheese, and then when they wafted the smell of the cat, right, they pulled a lot harder to try and move forwards. And I think what I'm still should be running away from is still that tendency to just distract myself, fill the void with, drinking, smoking, social media, whatever my vices are at the time. I think it's important that I'm using both of those to keep striving towards my ideal.
I'm reminded immediately by about an answer to a question I had on the podcast yesterday by a guy named Case Bradford, who, side note, I don't know if you're on Twitter or anything like that, or like you're on Instagram, obviously. I feel like from the brief time that I've known you, I think that you would align heavily with his message and just the way that he lives his life. But I asked him, and I will ask you later, about what arena that you're in and all these things. And his answer, in my opinion, probably the most prolific 1.5 minute clip from the podcast thus far. I tweeted, if this is the only thing that comes of it, then I consider it to be worth it. Without hesitating, he said, basically I said, what are you fighting for? What are you picking up your sword and running towards? He's like, it's a war within. It's a war with myself, because there's still a part of me that is lazy, is weak, is scared, afraid, anxious. And I know for me, this is him speaking, and I relate to it so much. For me to become the highest version of myself, and to give the world what it needs of me, to be the man that I need to be for my family, to be the man that I need to be for humanity as a whole, I need to, his words, slice that motherfucker's head off. That's what I wake up every day. It's a war within. So sort of that same type of dynamic where it's a dichotomy. You're running towards this ideal version, the man that you need to be, the man that your family needs you to be, your friends, your tribe, your humanity as a whole, the world needs more of X. It also needs less of you. And you need, that's not a battle that you're just going to win by neglecting it. Actually, in my opinion, it grows the more you neglect it. The more that we neglect the fact that there's malevolence and naivety in ourselves, the more that those tendencies grow. So I just find that very fascinating. Literally 24 hours ago, a guy told me that answer, and I relate to it so much. I think that's phenomenal.
That's spot on. I resonate very much with what you just said. And I know before we started talking, I mentioned I did my first ultra last year, and that's the most prevalent question that people will ask to anybody who's done an ultra marathon. Like, why? Why? And then the second question is like, what are you running from? What are you running? Is it like, are you running from something? You're running towards something. My answer is always both.
Yeah.
I'm running towards the best version of myself, and I'm running the fuck away from the lazy, unmotivated, undisciplined, would rather be in bed and sleep in, no good for society version of myself that very much exists. And so I'm careful not to be too hard on myself. However, I am somebody who really strives with discipline and structure, and being able to impose that upon myself has been a great superpower for me, and what I think is striving for the best version of myself.
The fact that Jordan Peterson talks about this, to stay on that same sort of path, you need to actually face the dark. I can't remember where he was talking, but he's talking about what you look away from, what you run away from grows. So the darkness within us, which I believe is inherent in every single human being that's ever existed, we are fallen beings, in my opinion. We have inherent sinful and what's the word? Malevolence. Honestly, I just feel like human beings have a tendency to act with malevolence. I also believe they have a tendency to act with benevolence, but just as you should focus on the benevolent part of us and try to grow that and to foster that, there is a part of us that is evil and is fallen. So how do you quell that that part of your your being from growing? I think that's exactly what you mentioned. It's the discipline, imposing your own will on yourself instead of allowing whatever circumstance or that lesser version of yourself to take control. And I think that that's part of one of the reasons I started the podcast, frankly, was to try to learn from people like yourself who've done ultras, who are doing dog training, special forces, Green Berets, MMA fighters, all these people, to like learn what they're doing, because it's so common. You probably haven't listened to all the episodes, but it's so common. It's so strange to me, the commonalities between the guests, because I'd probably say 85-90% of the people that have come on have mentioned something along the lines of what you just mentioned. Like, there's somebody that I'm going towards, somebody that I'm going away from, and it's all a part of me as a human being and you as a human being, and that's more or less the human journey, is figuring out when to be hard on yourself, when to show yourself grace, and operating in that dichotomy.
Yes sir, well said.
Because I'm sorry to interrupt again, but I have a tendency to be more on the backside, where like I'll be harder on myself than I need to, and then it's kind of this negative feedback loop, and then it's just very difficult for me to show myself grace, which is I believe makes it difficult for me to show other people grace.
Oh yeah.
So it's an interesting battle to be fought.
It sure is. It's one that I'm very familiar with, bro. Very familiar with. And the quote that kept ringing in my head while you were saying all that is, the line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man. And I think that's just, the first time I heard that, I think it was on a Lex Friedman podcast. I think it's a Russian author, but God, it's so true, isn't it? Like I know that there's an inherently good part of me and an inherently very bad part of me, and learning how to, like you said, give yourself grace. One of the things I've been leaning more into recently, because of a friend of mine, is meditation, and learning how to find a stillness, and even metta meditation, which has to do with inviting in like loving kindness towards other people. Like the rough structure framework work of it is like you're really trying to feel a sense of compassion for, firstly, somebody who it's easy for you to be compassionate for and want the best for. For me, it's like my grandma. It's like she's an angel. She doesn't have a bad bone in her body. Like, literally just the most loving, kind person probably I've ever met. And so I usually start my metta meditations with just like wishing her love and kindness, and it's so easy to do. Like, hey, she's, I want the best. Like, may she be free from suffering. May she be filled with love. Like, may she be filled with compassion. And then you go down to like, okay, pick somebody that is neutral to you, that, and try and repeat the same process. A stranger that you kind of know, somebody you see at the gym, or like, hey, they're going through, may they be free from suffering. Like, trying to feel that same level of connection and love for that person too, because my philosophy is that we're all children of God, and it's like this person is where they're at because of their life circumstances and the information and knowledge that they've been blessed with or lack thereof, right? And the next step is going towards like self. May I be free from suffering? May I, trying to point that also back at yourself. And then there's an extra step, which is picking somebody that you particularly dislike and trying to find and feel that same emotion for them. So that's been I wanted to really lay that out, because that has been a really helpful tool for me as I'm trying to invite more grace in for myself. And like you mentioned, it can be, for me, it can be challenging to find that line where I'm like, okay, I'm not being hard enough on myself, or I'm being too hard on myself. Like, there are spiritual practices that have been around for thousands of years. Like, humans have been in a similar, I'm not the first one to be thinking like, man, there's a good part of me and there's a bad part of me.
No,
and,
not at all.
I gotta try and be like the good part of me, and figuring out that self-talk game is sometimes a labyrinth. And sometimes it's easier for me to go to like wisdom of ancient religious texts. I've been diving more into Christianity recently, and also that was like I believe metta is like a Buddhist thing. And so I pull from a spiritual like buffet line.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, this looks good, I'll take
Yeah.
this, right? But it's a balance, right? Finding that grace for ourselves.
The part of that meta meditation that is interesting is because I've done sort of similar things. Tony Robbins has this thing that he calls priming, and it's like a 15-minute thing where you basically like you go through 3 or 4 different sections, I would call it, and one of them is sending energy and love towards other people. And this, to the uninitiated and the uninformed, I can guarantee you that sounds fugazi. That sounds like la 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 fairy dust.
Yeah.
I am telling anybody that's listening, I'm really reaffirming it to myself because I haven't done it in a while. It's a visceral feeling. You can feel it. But what he doesn't do in that is do it to himself. And the part that you just mentioned about somebody that's particularly neutral, and then yourself, and then somebody that you particularly don't dislike, what came to mind is doing it for the part of myself that I don't particularly like, because that's something I've never done. And perhaps I should like sit down and think about the parts of myself that I don't like and exercise compassion and love and kindness towards that person, because perhaps even more than the other human that you don't like, perhaps that person within me needs it more than anybody, so then I can show that compassion to other people. That's fascinating.
Right.
And to speak on the religious text and the fact that you're not the first person to think these things, I would argue that it's even like for the archetypical, you're a Jordan Peterson guy, it seems, the archetypical story of the Bible and Adam and Eve, like that's the first humans, depending on what you believe, the first humans, that's literally their story, is that the fall from good, like the good and evil, right? Like the fall of humanity in one way or another, whether you believe that's figurative or literal, that's been something that human beings have been struggling with and battling with internally, externally, since the dawn of time, in my opinion. So I think that it's like this arc that we all go, specifically men, I can't speak for a woman, but specifically for men, I think we all have this arc, and I don't know where or how it ends, but there's like this arc, for me at least, where I'm like learning more about myself. The more I learn about myself, the more I kind of, at least at this point in my life, the more I'm like, fuck, dude, like that old part of yourself is like gross, disgust, like wow, like just more distaste for like the old part of myself. And I'm hopeful and prayerful that, and faithful that at some point that arc will shift, and I'll be like, oh wait, dude, there's actually like XYZ things that I'm super stoked about myself. But I think it's the moral of that rant is, I think that it's an arc that every man goes on.
Sure. I think a hero's journey is a really good outline for that. I'm thinking about it like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's helpful for me to remember that it's not always a linear process. And here I'll tie in some dog training, because to get back to my roots here, it's an important concept for people to understand, both for humans and for dogs, that like the behavioral change, in dogs, or the healing, like it's not, okay, you're gonna get, every day I work on this, you're gonna get better. You're gonna get a little bit better, then you're gonna get worse. Then you're gonna get even more better than that, and then you might get a little bit worse, and then you might get better. Just as long as over time you're heading in the right direction. And I think having a clear intention of your goal, whether it's to be more loving or to get my dog to stop biting people, like as long as you're clear on your goal and you're getting some help and you have like some tools along the way, there's going to be ups and downs, but you may not get there per se, but I think it's interesting to think about it like there is no there, like everything exists in the present moment, and it's really the journey. That's something that my mentor Michael Ellis really drove into my head. And of course intuitively it makes, on the surface, makes like seems so obvious, but unless you're like reminding yourself that, especially in the dog training space, like it is a journey. It is not like, hey, the dog is fixed, now it's a different dog. Sometimes it does seem like that, because I can take a dog who's been just never been given a clear direction in its life, and like 2 weeks later you're like, whoa, seems like a different dog, and in many ways it is. But you know, shit's gonna happen that we weren't expecting. Like there's gonna be circumstances that you couldn't control for, and you know, things are gonna change, and your dog's gonna get older, or they might get hurt, they might get sick, might be a weird dog, you know, etc. It's just important for me to also relay to my clients that, hey, this is a journey with your dog. This is not like once I just fix them up and then they're a different dog. You have to keep along with the training. If you don't stick to the training won't stick. I think that's true as well for my own personal life. Like if I just kind of let myself slip, so to speak, it's a different thing than like intentionally taking a break or, you know, having some rest time. But you know, I got to stay on top of the horse, like fight that little battle every day, stack little wins on top of each other, and hopefully build some momentum in the right direction.
Yeah, it's so interesting how there's some quote somewhere that I'm thinking of. I can't remember it specifically, but it's about, we give people the advice that we should listen to.
Oh, dude, I was just gonna say that, bro.
Yeah, that's
great.
Because I'm sitting here thinking like,
yeah,
I think and talk about the fact that it's a journey, it's a process all the time, and then with my own self, my own life, I'm like, why am I not there yet? Like, what even? I wrote this like long tweet sort of thing the other day about like the ideal, and the fact that I believe that it is absolutely necessary for there to be a clear picture of the ideal, but it's also absolutely necessary that we will never reach it.
Right.
Because anybody that's ever won something, anybody that's ever ultra marathon, I want to dive into that in a little bit, but like the more specifics of that. But for you, if the finish line was your goal, then you, quite literally, a singular instant of your life, there's only one singular instant that you actually crossed the finish line. So did your life reach its pinnacle at that instant? I would bet that you say no. So it's like, anybody who's ever accomplished something knows that there is not, it's like not even a real thing. Like, oh, once I get to the MLB, once I get to this finish line, once I get to this level of dog training, once I get to this level of success, however you want to define it, that's literally a figment of our imagination. It's not a real thing. And it seems to me that I like tell people and advise people and think about that, and then unless I'm being like actively conscious or actively and consciously reflecting on my own life, it's like hard to follow that advice, which is interesting.
I'm so glad you said that, because that was in my mind earlier. I couldn't remember it. There's a quote out there, I think it's by Sam Harris. Wisdom is simply listening to your own advice. And you said it perfectly. I think it's actually a Jordan Peterson rule, maybe number 2 or 3. I just spotted a Malinois from like a few hundred yards away. It's hard to miss them.
Beautiful dogs.
Treat yourself like a best friend who needs help, I think is
treat yourself like somebody you're responsible for taking care of.
Exactly. And so it's been very present for me that, even just recently, I saw a quote that was like, or a journal prompt rather, like, imagine if you're going through a tough time, imagine your best friend is going through the exact same situation as you, and they came to you for advice. What would you tell them? And as soon as I had that prompt in my head, it's like, I know exactly what I should be doing. Like, the information is in here, especially in this culture and the society that we live in today that is very much so, self-development focused. There's a big kind of reward on becoming a better, not a reward, but there's a big focus, and there's a lot of like weight given to trying to be better versions of ourselves, right? And I think that's net positive, and I think that's good. But I think I can get so inundated with good information about how I could be a better person that it's almost like I need to take some periods of, fasting from information in order to start to actually integrate it.
Lala. Sorry.
No, that's
She just
that's
ran
okay.
off. No,
The Malinois got a lot closer for you folks listening.
the quote that comes to mind is Alex Hormozy. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
I think it was him who said, we don't have an over-information problem. We have an under implementation problem.
Yeah.
So I agree with you entirely. It's like there is zero shortage of podcasts, of shorts on Instagram, of YouTube videos, of books, of articles. Lila, come here. I think she's more interested in the bowl. What's up, brother?
Beautiful Mal. She's a beautiful Mal.
Oh, appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no shortage of any of that stuff. It's I would argue it's actually like a surplus, and therein lies that. Lila, come here. What should I do?
Okay, so here's what you're doing right now, and this is one of the most common things that I see. She's getting the idea that you don't want her to go engage in that, but I would use your words differently. Like, you're using her name as basically telling her to not do something. And when I talk to my dogs, name is just the attention getter. Then I give a cue, and whether that cue is to, hey, don't do that, no, don't do that, or I give some alternative behavior to do instead. So you said come eventually, but you didn't really hold her accountable for coming. And that's where some repetitions on the front end really helps.
Okay.
Is like, again, baking in that obligation, especially for the recall. Like, hey, when I say come, it's going to be great when you do it. By the way, it's not optional. When I say come, you really have to. I'm very passionate about the recall. I'm actually writing an ebook right now about like bulletproof.
Yeah, that's actually the conversation we had in the sauna.
Cool.
And that ties into the meme.
It does. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's going to be a fire reel.
No, see, this is exactly, no joke, why I wanted her to be out here for this, because I think it's like live training. It's like, okay, well, this is an instance where, and here's another reason, other than the fact that you just seem like a cool dude. How many people do you know that have dogs? Most, right?
Most people in
most
this
of my
city.
friends, dogs. Most adults, even that, like my parents' friends, dogs. So and it's such it's one of those things I've noticed with my friends. If you got a baby, I'm sure, or if you had a baby, then I'm sure that you would probably look into how to parent and all this stuff. I know people that have gotten dogs and literally done nothing, like no knowledge gain, no active seeking of help or instruction, and they'll just get a dog and then think giving it treats and
Petting
hitting
it.
on the nose and petting it is going to train them. So it's interesting to me, the lack of, there's almost a disconnect between people just kind of think of dogs, in my opinion. I know I have several friends that I'm thinking of off the top of my head that get dogs, and then it's almost just like it's like going to get groceries. It's like, oh cool, I have a dog now. It's like I think there's like a threshold of knowledge that needs to be surpassed. Not needs to, but is optimal
For sure.
to be passed, to be able to, for the dog to have the best life, and also it to be a good companion for you, and likewise. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's underappreciated how big of a difference having a well-trained dog can be versus a dog who's not well-trained. Like, even in a social situation, for example, like if you have a dog who has zero training, and caveat here, there are some dogs that you can literally just get from the breeder. Like, you can take home a doodle something or other or a lab, and just like they'll turn out okay. But that's like, what percentage? A quarter, 25%, 30%? Without any real intentional training, they're just a pretty okay dog. Like, there are just some good dogs out there. But for every one of those, there's a lot more that really benefit. And there's I like this saying I first heard from a dog trainer, Walt Quentz, and he said, bad dogs need training, good dogs deserve it. Because it's also like, I really try to get this across to my clients. Make your dog work for an hour. If you have horses, they do this. Like, I've heard this in horse stuff as well. Like, hey, maybe your horse doesn't want to do it right now, but this is 1 hour out of their day. When you're done, they're gonna appreciate the mental and physical work that you're putting them through. Especially when it's a puppy, it's like, taking your kids, it's your kid's first day of kindergarten, and they don't want to go. What are you gonna do? okay, you can stay home.
Pet him.
Yeah, so pet him. Good boy. Here's some cookies. It's like, no, you push them. You go. Hey, you gotta go. It's gonna be stressful. You're gonna learn. It's just what you do.
It's not an option.
It's not optional. You go to school, and the same should be true for some level of training. It doesn't have to be an intensive thing, but as you know, I'd be remiss not to mention that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. As you start the training process early, you invest on the front end. The rest of your life is gonna be much easier. Much easier.
I think there might be, at least in my life, the clearest picture of what you just mentioned, where one dog you could leave alone and it would probably just sit on its own and it would do whatever, and then one dog you can leave on its own and it's like the most rambunctious. My parents have 2 labs. One of them's an American lab named Hank, and for anybody that's listening knows Hank. I'm totally biased, and it's maybe even an ego thing. Hank is a living legend of a dog. He is a 100-pound chocolate lab, one of the tallest labs. Like, he's pretty skinny, but he's just tall for some reason.
Okay.
Purebred lab. He's got extra skin, so his jaw just always droop. He always looks high. He's just like, ooh. He's just a big galoot is what I call him. He's just, ooh. And he's very chill, very deliberate with, like, he's not going to really be doing much that he doesn't really want to or doesn't feel like he needs to do. Very, very easy to reprimand and train throughout the years. Handful, maybe less than a handful, he's 9 years old, less than a handful of times where he's really gotten into some trash or done something he shouldn't have. They have another lab. He's like a 60, 70-pound, we call him a midget dog because he's the run of the litter. He's a yellow lab, and he's an English lab, and he's this big. And for anybody that knows Poncho, he's like a weird legend in its own right, because it's like he actually just doesn't care what humans say. Like, no matter, like, dude, the amount of times that this dog has done, he would eat socks, and I think he's had three vet trips for eating socks. And we would block off the laundry room, we would close all our rooms, and we would punish him, we would reward him for not eating socks, all these things. And this is long-winded, but just you can imagine a big old chocolate lab, so it's different in size, different in color, different in look. He's droopy. Poncho is this tiny little yellow lab with a shorter face, very thick, and literally jumping, like the type of dog that would be like jumping off walls and doing like 360s and stuff. And when you're walking him, he just wants to, Hank's just like, whatever. It's just funny to me because you're exactly right. I believe if you left Hank alone, he would have figured it out.
Yep.
If you left Poncho alone, he'd be the leader of some dog gang somewhere.
Dude, I have a yellow lab myself who's about 60 pounds or so, and he's stocky. And, he's a good dog, but I also have an older golden retriever. He's an English cream golden named Hopper, who's 100 pounds. Like, he was the dog that got me into dog training.
Very cool.
But I could have just left him alone for the most part. He was like, all right. Like, when he was 1 year old, people would come up to me like, oh my God, your dog's so good. How old is he? I'm like, yeah, he's about 1. They'd be like, oh my God, he's just a good boy.
And
like,
that's when you say, I'm actually a dog trainer.
Yeah, right, yeah. At the time, like, I wasn't, but, I was like, oh, making him sit to get his food bowl and, like, making him wait for it. And I thought that was pretty much the extent of what he needed. But he was just like, all right, whatever you say, Dad. No problem.
Lila with Sean, I got to give him props. He's done a really good job. I'm obviously not her owner, but Sean has, it's remarkable. Like, she will walk literally foot, like, step for step with him and all that. So he's done a good job for having no background and stuff like that. But that's sort of the same with her. Like, I think she would have been fine.
Yeah, I think Hopper actually gave me a false assumption that I was a dog trainer, because I was like, man,
too good to be true.
I got this golden retriever figured out. Let me try your whatever breed that is. I'll give it a shot. I'll train dogs. And that was part of the story I didn't mention. But when I was in college, after my sophomore year, I was part of a fraternity. I had a girlfriend. I was like big social life, very popular, and doing all sorts of functions, and my time was very full of people and parties and whatever else. And then that summer after my sophomore year, I dropped out of the fraternity. I broke up with my girlfriend. All of a sudden, my schedule was like clear. I didn't have anything to do. And that spring, my mom got this dog, he's called Retriever Hopper. And so come fall time, I ended up, because I was like kind of training him over the summer, I ended up taking him with me to school my junior year. And so that was when I really fell in love with not only him as a dog, but fell in love with a life that was centered around good daily habits. So I needed to get up, he needed to go out, I needed to get outside, I needed to walk around, I needed to get my face in the sun, get my feet on the ground, and like hang out outside. So in a way, it kind of helped steer me into a path of like healthier habits and a more functional way of living life. And it also gave me this desire to like, man, I have a great relationship with this dog. I want to help other people have a similar relationship with their dog. And so around that time, I would take dogs of like the surrounding communities, like people that I knew, whose dog was, would bark at people or would jump or would pull on the leash. Like, oh, let me take them all. I just liked having a pack of dogs with me. And so that was like my thing. I would just kind of do that in my free time, just train these dogs.
That's another thing that Hormozy talks about in terms of like business development, specifically a service-based business, is doing things for free. I don't know if you charge people or not, but like just.
I do.
Yeah, well, no, but now obviously, like when you.
Oh yeah, when I started, yeah, for free.
Well, I just feel like that was probably such instrumental experience for you. Number one, having multiple dogs with you at the same time and dealing with that. Number two, different types of dogs with different experiences in their own homes and own owners. And I just can see that being a pretty informative period where you're learning about what it's like to be a dog trainer without having to have like the overhead of having your own business and stuff. It was like a taste. It was like a dip in the water. It's like, okay, well, because if you hated it, maybe you go a different route. But I do want to touch on the ultra before we get too far away from it.
Sure.
You're exactly right. When people hear ultra marathon, they're like, "What the fuck is wrong with you, man?"
Why?
Yeah,
I could never.
Yeah.
I'm like,
why? So,
all right.
Yeah, well, just because that's fascinating to me, man. And I've never been a big runner. I don't know why I had this. I still think it's true for specific sport training like baseball, tennis to a degree, hockey, just different. Golf to a degree, anything that's explosive movement, I believe that it's really not, slow twitch muscle development is not the most optimal. Like I think a lot more sprints and a lot more quick twitch and stuff like that. So I was a pitcher, which is like every 20 seconds I'm not doing anything like consistently, it's every 20 seconds so I was doing a lot of sprints, a lot of quick lifts and stuff like that. So I never got into running. It has something that's crossed my mind. I have two buddies, James and Jared, that are a lot more into running than me. And like for example, he texted me the other day on Sunday. He's like, "Yeah, I just got a quick 10," and I was like, that seems like a marathon. I'm like, damn, that's a long time. But for the uninitiated like myself, somebody who may have inspiration to do that at some point, what was your thought process for doing that? What was the instigation? What was the catalyst? And what did you learn throughout the process? You can take the reins on this one. That's an interesting.
Yeah. So this is probably not a very common reason for doing it, but and I'll back this up for some context. After that formative junior year of college, where I was like, I'm not going to be a physical therapist. I don't know what I want to do. I had an idea with my best friend at the time. His name is Juan, and we were going to drop out of school, move to Hawaii. We really just loved being outside and running trails and like being with our dogs, and we didn't know what we were gonna do, whether it was like a YouTube channel or a podcast or like we ended up doing the running podcast I told you about. But basically we were gonna like move out to Hawaii. We never did. And so a few years later, this was last year in 2022, it felt like we needed to just send something big. And we had always, we had watched probably in 2018 or 2019, this documentary came out on YouTube by a guy named Billy Yang. He does a bunch of like ultra marathon documentaries. This one was called Y100, and it was all about the Leadville 100 race that just happened last week. And man, the power of that documentary, like I remember sitting in my apartment on the couch, and after it ends, I said out loud, like, I'm gonna run that race one day. I don't know when, I don't know why, but like there's something about the pushing edge of the human will. That just fascinates me. And I know that deep down I've got this fucking dog in me that just is gritty as fuck, but needs some, some pushing to really something to run towards. And so we decided on, it was actually while I was at dog training school last year, we were texting. I'm like, dude, we should really send the Grand Canyon. Like I knew I wanted to go back there. Actually, the reason we picked that spot, when I was on my road trip in 2020, my soul searching road trip, I mentioned briefly, but I met some people in Sedona who took me down into the Grand Canyon, and long story, but when we were down there, we were climbing our way up, and we met this guy at one of the water stations, and it's like early in the morning, like the sun has just coming up, and it was early. I just look over at this guy, and I could tell he was a runner, and I start picking his brain. I'm like, hey man, like how many miles are you going? He's like 50. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, I just got back from the North Rim. Like I run from the South Rim to the North Rim, and I run back to the South Rim. And I'm like, good guy. He's like, I run from the South Rim to the North Rim. I eat 2 peanut butter and jellies, and I run back. I'm like,
you're like, what the hell are you talking
yeah,
about?
what, bro? Like, and I was familiar because I saw that documentary. I was familiar with ultra runners, but I never met one in real life. There's just something about this guy that I was so drawn to. Like, he was in the depths of hell, and was just like, I'm gonna make it out of here. And I was just like, all right, he inspired me. And on that day, like after he left that water station, I looked to my group and I was like, guys, I'm gonna run ahead. Like I'm gonna run up the fucking mountain, basically, from the bottom of the canyon to the top. There's a big ascent, and they're like, they just laughed at me, like, okay. And I've got like a big school backpack on, like filled with like blankets, and like not in a position to be running up the side of the Grand Canyon. But I pushed myself so hard that day that like I got to the edge of my emotional breaking point, and I just burst into tears. Like, it was the most beautiful experience of like gratitude, and I was like coming out of a really dark period of my life, and it just felt like, again, this weight was lifted off my shoulders, and I found some of that on the run that day. And so I knew I wanted to come back eventually and do it like with a, prepared and like gonna do the full route. And so yeah, we chose, it's a somewhat common run in the ultra community. It's the rim to rim to rim, run from the South Rim to the North Rim and back up to the South Rim, 48 miles. But that's the one we set our sights on, and it wasn't like a sanctioned race event.
Mm-hmm.
There were no like aid stations. They call it a badass run because you're just out there, and it's like whatever you got on you, that's what you got. There's no like ambulance on standby. There's no like race crew with snacks and caffeine and Tylenol and fucking whatever you need to like change your shoes, and that stuff's great.
Yeah.
But there's something about just being out there by yourself
Your
with a
own
backpack
devices.
on, and like, all right, I got to get out of here.
Shit, man, I might go hit a run after this. But there's a thought I'm gonna air it out because I haven't formulated it yet. I literally just had this thought while you were speaking, so forgive me for any rambling or any incoherence. But this has to do with your trip and where you were before, the period of your life, your trip, and then these emotional moments that you're having. It's almost as if there's in life, there's a weight that we are meant to be holding, that we're meant to be carrying on us in a given point in our life. Now that I said it out loud, perhaps one of the main parts of the journey of life is to increase that weight over time. And no, Lala. See, every time I do something, I'm like, what should I do?
No, that was great. That was
Okay.
good. She looked at you and was like, all right, Dad. You got the message.
So it's almost like part of the journey of life is to be able to increase that weight. Like, your maximum potential is like the maximum responsibility that you can bear and still be the person that you need to be for those that you love. Maybe, I don't know if that's right. That's just a thought I'm having. But in a given moment, we have a weight that we're supposed to be carrying, or that we are capable of carrying in that moment, that is optimal, in the form of distractions, in the form of vices, in the form of negative energy and negative friends and negative external inputs into our life and internal, we add to that weight to the point where it deteriorates our strength from carrying the things we're supposed to be carrying. And then that's when we get into a rut. And then when you do something like yourself, so the first step is removing the excess weight, which in this instance, the way I'm perceiving it is you leaving that environment, getting rid of those distractions, getting rid of that lack of clarity and that confusion and the darkness. So the excess weight is now stripped. Now you're at your baseline. And then what kind of dawned on me when you had this emotional moment running up the Grand Canyon is that you're at your baseline and you reach your peak, and now you have an emotional moment because you just expanded it now. So in that very moment, it's almost the way that I'm perceiving it is that that was like an instant in your life where you noticed your capability increasing, your potential increasing, and there was all these cuts that need to be made and all these feedback loops that needed to be tied up and all these things to that moment. And then it's like in that exact moment, you just reached a new level of potential. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I was just trying to wrap that around like in my own head. So I think that's fascinating. I think something about running specifically, there's many different ways to test yourself, but something about running and human beings, I don't know what it is.
Have you read Born to Run?
No.
Well, that might answer your question.
Should I read that and then talk about it?
Yeah.
But it's just something about it is like inherently, like nobody ever wants to do it. It's not something that you're like sitting here gnawing at the bit to do. It's kind of counterintuitive to do when there's not a survival mechanism kicking in where it's like you're running from a saber-toothed tiger
or you're running to go catch a gazelle.
Exactly. So getting yourself to run for the sake of running is extremely counterintuitive and biologically intuitive. So the will that it takes and the endurance muscularly and mentally that it takes to get yourself to do that is exactly why I think you had that moment in the Grand Canyon.
Well, I first want to argue one of the points you just made, that it's not like biologically inherently, we're not motivated to do it, but I think we've just lost that functionality. Like you see little kids, you let them go at the park, they're not just walking around.
That's a good
like,
point.
we're running over here.
That's a good point. Very good point.
And we've lost a lot of that. I think some of it's due to age, some of it's just the society that we live in. So I think a bit of that is like kind of retraining myself to be more in touch with that inner child who likes to run. And on the note of, pushing myself to run, I'll be real honest, I don't want to run today. I'm going to do it. Most of the time, I do not want to do it. However, for me, like I have to really push myself to go run some pavement, like around the city or even on like the Ladybird Trail. Greenbelt, I like a little bit more. When I was training for the Ultra, all of my runs were mountain runs because I was in Northern California at dog training school. And so I would be like, that is something that I'm really pulled to. Like that lights my heart on fire. Like I was setting my alarm for 4:30, 5 a.m. and chomping at the bit. Like, dude, I got all my gear out. I got my nutrition, my hydration, like all my gear, and I'm just ready to go. Like 5 a.m. I'm up, I'm driving it, and it was so beautiful to just be the only person on the mountain, just me in the mountain, perfect weather for running. And like that, I really, I often would run up the mountain without any headphones in, and then I was ready to have a little fun. I might like drink some caffeine, take a little microdose, put my headphones in, and just run down the mountain. And boy, I tell you, that is
some good mornings,
dude. Like
that sounds magical.
Like felt like I was flying at times. Like literally, it's like
I could see like slight microdose.
Just woo! Like the most fun that I could have in a day is like often on a mountain. And so like I snowboard too, but it's just something about the mountains and getting out there and pushing yourself to do it. But I said pushing yourself, but what really, and I think I heard this concept from Tony Robbins. Was like, Tony, where do you get all this like motivation to go up and do all this stuff? He's like, I'm pulled to do it. Like I don't have to push myself. It's because my why is like it's pulling me. He enjoys what he does, and I do too. But I did want to, say that I hear your philosophy there about the weight, and it really got my gears turning do think there's something to that, like with the perceived weight that's on our shoulders and like how much we're able to carry mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. Like that is something that makes us inherently more valuable to society and to ourselves and to our friends and family. Like when we can bear the burden of responsibility, I do think that like a slightly younger version of myself, even only a few years ago, like I just want freedom. I just want to be free from all my responsibilities. And I'm starting to realize slowly, painfully, that it's really I'm yearning for responsibility in a way that makes me feel like valued. But I really like the way that you outlined it as far as like weight that I'm meant to be carrying, and at least is what I got from what you said, is like a weight that I'm almost putting on myself unnecessarily through distractions or negative energy or negative self-talk and compartmentalizing different emotions. I think that can weigh on us in a way that is unproductive. And so I think there's a good reason to kind of dig into that personally, to see like, oh, where am I holding on to things that I shouldn't be, and where am I holding on to things that are going to actually help me, be a better person to my loved ones and be a better functioning, disciplined, whatever member that can actually serve other people. But I do love, the idea of doing things through life lightly. Like there was, I think it's a Ram Dass quote in his book, Be Here Now, but it's like, you can do it like there's a big weight on you, or you can do it like it's all part of the dance. And it's like, what I take from that is we're gonna all experience these human emotions that are very challenging and extremely tough, but it's just like releasing them is just like a blink of an eye away. It's just a thought away. Like, oh, I don't need to take this so seriously, even though I'm depressed or I'm anxious or I'm, struggling with my demons. Like, you can make that however heavy you want it to be, but you can also just let it go if you really want to, and if you really kind of built some of those mental faculties that for me have come along with meditation and other practices. Like, yeah, I don't have to hold on to that stuff. It sometimes, but not all the time.
First, so that everything you just said. First, I want to appreciate or thank you for challenging that point. I agree with you. I think in that regard, where if we let a kid say, hey, here's a park, he's not just going to walk around and sit down. He's going to be running around. Literally, there's nothing to do. He's going to run around.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Number two, on the responsibility, I think if you take a step back and look at what most people would consider the greatest men to ever live, the common denominator, in my opinion, is the responsibility that they were able to bear, or to carry, the burden that they were able to bear, and not, for lack of a better phrase, not be sour because of it. They were able to gracefully, like I'm thinking of Winston Churchill, Theodore Roosevelt, Alexander the Great, Napoleon, Jesus, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, all these people. The one thing that's coming to my mind right now is the weight that they were able to hold and do so gracefully and not be resentful because of it, but actually look at it as a blessing, because if not them, then who? So to your point, I think that's exactly right. I think the weight that we bear is essentially the value, especially as men. I believe that's the value, or related to the value that we provide to our tribe, right? So if we were in a hunter-gatherer tribe and there's one man who's probably going to be the chief, who in times of war, in times of immense stress, everybody looks to him and what do we do? And he's going to be composed, deliberate, decisive, and under control. He's not going to be freaking out. Whereas if there is a younger soldier or a younger warrior that's freaking out, like, he's going to be of less value in that situation to the tribe. So interesting thought there. The second thing is the ultras. The third thing is hunting. And then what were you just now saying? Oh, the lightheartedness.
Yeah.
So this is another, it's top of mind, which I've found happens a lot in terms of, like, I had a conversation yesterday and I think I see these correlations. The first thing I said to Case was, I want to thank you for the message that he sends. And this is why I said, honestly, I think that you would like his message. I said this exact wording, some variation of, it's very serious what you're talking about, but you talk about it in such a light way. You talk about it the way you present it, the way that you write your post, the way that your pictures, your timeline, like your actual feed looks, the way that you speak, it's very serious. Like, this is life that we're talking about. This, you literally get one chance. It's your vitality, it's your health, it's your lack of disease or experience with disease. It's a serious topic, but he talks about it in such a light way and presents it in such a light way. It's super refreshing. And now that I'm thinking about it, in that response I mentioned earlier, where he's talking about having a war with himself and cutting off the parts of him that serve no purpose. A very serious answer, an answer that would, if there was dramatic music and Morgan Freeman was reading it, it would be viral on Instagram for being like one of those. And he's sitting here like laughing. He's like, dude, I need to slice that motherfucker's head off. Like, yeah. I'm like, wow, bro, you are literally thinking these thoughts that are so profound and so fundamental, but the way he goes about it is so light. It's so refreshing. I think it directly relates to what you're just talking about. And I could not agree more. Something that but I think I would benefit from is implementing that in my life. Like, it's not so serious if we see it as not so serious, right? It's like, it's as simple as saying, you know what? This, like, I literally in that instant, oh, whatever, good. So I don't know if you have a comment on that, but yeah, those are the first two things, and the third and fourth thing that I was thinking of have to do with ultras. But if you want to comment on that, go ahead.
Yeah, I think just that it's in the blink of an eye, it can be a completely different. The only thing that we can truly control is how we respond to things, not the things that we can't control our environment to a large degree. A lot of the things that happen to us completely out of our control. Who our parents were, what kind of money we were born with, where we were born. But I consider myself extremely blessed to be where I'm at today in this country with all this freedom and roof over my head and running water and a few loving dogs and friendly people to meet and chat with. And even when I'm perceiving myself to be going through challenging times, I try and zoom out my perspective a little bit. And one of the things that I come back to very often that helps me carry the weight a little bit lighter, I would say, is thinking about people who don't have it as lucky as me. Like, there's easily 1 billion people on the planet who would consider their prayers answered to switch places with me today. Like, I'm not, there's no famine in my country, there's no political injustice. We'll leave politics out of it, but there's no war going on. There's no the immediate members of my family are healthy. My dogs are healthy. I'm privileged in many ways, and there's so many people out there who would do almost anything to switch places with me. I'd be wise to remember that. I think we all would be.
Phenomenal. I have nothing to add to that. I think that's exactly I'll probably replay that later today. The comment I wanted to make about the ultras is there any particular lesson, like a singular lesson that you've drawn from that experience? The process of training to it and actually completing the ultra, is there a singular lesson that stands out?
Any lesson I could give you, you will have probably heard from anybody else who's run an ultra marathon. It's you just gotta push through it. You just gotta believe in yourself. It's very cliche stuff. But I will tell you about an experience that I had while it was probably mile 41, 42. And it's at this point in the course where it's the final ascent up the mountain. One of my knees was giving out pretty bad. Every step was gritting my teeth, pain. And I thought about my grandfather on my mom's side, who's a Vietnam War veteran, Purple Heart recipient. He's had I don't know if he was shot in the leg or shrapnel hit him in the leg. He's had a prosthetic leg for my entire life. And so he's always limped around a little bit, just had this subtle limp. And when I was hiking up that final ascent, I felt that's how I was moving. And I thought about him, and I'm this man has lived the entire last 30, 40, 50 years of his life in some sort of small disability that I don't even think about. but that's his every day. And here I considered myself lucky to be able to intentionally go into that experience, like knowing that it's gonna hurt for a little bit, but like my leg's gonna heal up and I'm gonna be okay. A lot of people who are disabled, and I'll get into another thing that I'm a part of called Ainsley's Angels, but like a lot of real, like true, like fuel for me comes from gratitude at like how lucky I am to have this healthy body that can do all these crazy things that I want it to, because I have the freedom and ability to choose that, hey, I want to go out and experience some pain in the interest of my self-development and, you know, soul searching and doing things that I love, like running on the mountains, and my body's healthy and I'm blessed by that. So I thought about him, thought about my grandpa when I was in the canyon, and that like gave me some fuel, gave me some perspective to keep going and push through it. I do want to say that I'm a part of an organization called Ainsley's Angels, which is they connect runners with disabilities, like people who can't run in races. We as a runner push them in a wheelchair for the race. So including the gnarliest day of my life was in 2021, and I ran the Austin Marathon pushing this woman in a wheelchair, and I was not trained for it. Like I ran probably like 13 miles was my longest run leading up to the marathon. I was like, oh man, I signed up for it. I'll run and I was not planning on pushing anybody for the marathon. And one of the organizers, Cassie, called me a few days prior, and she's like, hey, last minute emergency, one of our runners had to drop out due to an illness. This woman really wants to participate in the race. Like, can you push her? And I'm sitting there like with like a few days to the race going, in my head, I'm like, yeah, I can do it.
I probably could.
Yeah, I'll do it. And she's like, okay, great. She weighs 210 pounds, and you'll meet her tomorrow. I was like, okay, 210, man. That's
nice.
More than me by a good amount. So I met her the next day. Her name is Jean Crawford, and I won't go into the full story because we'll probably run out of time a little bit, but it was, she was such a lovely person, and like for me, it was the hardest run I've ever done. And like by mile, I had a few, like the front wheel of the racing chariot popped off before we even got to the starting line. And so we like put it back on last second, and it just like, it wasn't on. It had this like gnarly veer to the right. So I had to kept popping it up and adjusting it. And eventually I got to mile 1, and like a tear came out of my eye. The first
mile 1.
At mile 1, like first probably 2.5 miles of the Austin Marathon is uphill. So it was like, I was like, oh, this is what it's gonna be like. Oh, okay.
You're thinking back to that call. You're like, I should have said no.
Yeah, I was like, oh man.
That's remarkable. And do you have anywhere you need to be at?
Nope.
Time?
No.
Okay,
I got no issues.
Nowhere either.
Great.
And I have a lot more to dive into. So I'm
cool. Well,
if this pushes 3 hours, I'm totally
cool. So yeah, let me just dive into that story there, because I think it's worth double clicking on. Is like by mile 9, like my legs were absolute jelly. The Austin Marathon is a pretty hilly course, and so not only was I, every little bit of incline was like 10x my effort to push somebody uphill. Like my uphills, I soon got they gave me like a little head start so I could get out of people's way, but because of my wheel troubles, I had to pull over and like readjust the wheel. People had to help me out, and so then I had to go back into the marathon amidst thousands of people, just kind of like all crammed into like 1 or 2 lanes of a road, but I'm in this big racing chariot, so I was like weaving through people. My uphills were slower, but my downhills were actually faster, so I was trying to use that momentum to help me,
like hopping on.
Yeah, do a ghost riding.
Yeah.
And so man, this was I'd say the closest I've come to like feeling the presence of God was on this race. And it was mile 12 or mile 13, Like I said, by mile 9, my legs were done. And so by mile 12 or 13, there's this big infamous part of the course called Enfield Road, and it takes you out west all the way towards like Mozart's Coffee, and you head up Enfield Road towards downtown, and it's basically like some rolling hills and then one giant, like massive, the biggest uphill of the whole course, and like it's pretty steep. And by that point, I was just like, oh my god, like I don't know if I can do this. And when I started, like I was probably halfway up the hill, and I was literally like my hands fully outstretched, head down, just trudging along. And I said to myself, like in my head, my eyes were closed, I said, God, if you're with me, I could really use some help right now. And like in that moment, a woman comes up to me and she's like, hey, can I help you push that race chair? I was like, before I could even say anything, another person came up on the other side of me, said, hey man, can I help you with the chair? And then another person comes up. Like in an instant, I had 3 people like literally take the weight out of my hands. Like I said a prayer and it was answered. Like in that moment, like physically the weight was taken off of my hands, dude. I wanted to like fucking cry my eyes out. And it was like I was literally just like hucking air. I was like, oh my god, like it was. But I was running a marathon, so I couldn't just like stop there and cry for a bit. So I had to like I couldn't even answer them. I was just like crying into my shirt, like oh my god, like it was incredible. And so I just like I had to like kind of stifle those tears and like push on. And then that was like a pretty crowded part of the course. There was lots of people cheering you on and there was support. And then it gets pretty lonely at like mile 16, mile 17, mile 18. It gets pretty lonely out there. And so I was just like in this deep mental battle. And by like mile 26, there's like one final, it's 26.2. The last like 0.2 miles, there's just like, I thought I was done and I rounded one of the last corners, and there's just like one more uphill part of the course. And I was like, the first time that the whole race, this woman Jean who I was pushing was like, just so nice, and you're doing amazing, like if you want to stop, like we can stop. I'm like, no, I'm fucking getting you to the finish line. She's like, ain't he an angel? Like, isn't he amazing? Just giving me love the whole time. That was the first time after I turned that corner where I let myself like be upset. I was like, fuck, I just like cursed. I was like, son of a
what
bitch. I was like, no. And she was like, oh, she like got a little concerned. She was like, are you okay?
And you're talking to yourself?
I said that out loud. I was like, I cursed, and I was like, son of a bitch. I could not believe that there was another uphill. So I just like put my head down, and I am just so deep in it. And this guy, like I see this guy who had already finished his race. I see him coming and just like making a beeline for me because he knew like I needed help. And he just comes and like doesn't even ask, just like, hell, he's like, dude, I'm gonna help you get to that light. It's all downhill from there. You're gonna finish right. He's just like, I just started crying, dude. I could not, like in that moment of pain, you could have like done something as simple as hand me a cup of water. I would have cried. I was just like so grateful for this guy coming in and helping me push this thing. When I finally crossed the finish line and I met up with my girlfriend, dude, I bawled like a baby for like 20 minutes. I was like, that was the hardest thing. I cried because of the pain.
Yeah.
Like I was, found myself in moments of gratitude, but I also cried because I was like a pretty intense bout of suffering.
It hurt
like,
that bad.
It hurt that bad.
And the emotional fragility of that moment is probably amplified. Dude, I'm sitting here, just to clarify for anybody listening, I just got tears in my eyes thinking about like the difficulty. You're not even halfway through the race. And first off, I'm extremely glad that we just clarified the fact that you could share that story, because I'm so glad that was just shared with me. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, man.
I can only imagine at this point. I've done like baseball. We had like the Hokie Challenge and the Ram Sanity at VCU when I was playing baseball in college, where we do like these pretty hard, difficult sort of obstacle courses that were mixed in with runs and like thousands of stairs climbed and stuff like that were difficult, and definitely some of the more difficult things that I've done, but I can guarantee you I've never done anything difficult as that. And I can imagine in that moment literally praying like, God, please give me some help if you're with me. And then having those people, I'd probably be like,
Yeah, dude.
They look at you like, what the hell's going on with this guy? It's like, you don't even understand.
Yeah.
But no, that's a phenomenal story, man. I think you might have just made a runner out of me, dude. I might go buy some running shoes or something.
Dude, we'll get out there.
But I'm so glad you shared that story, dude. That's just absolutely phenomenal. And just also just the insight into people. Like, that dude, you think that dude's suffering because he just finished his race? Yeah, he's still suffering. He just ran a freaking 26-mile race. And he doesn't even ask. He's like, hey, man, I'm helping you out. And you're like, okay. Yeah. And then the 3 people that are going up this hill that are not pushing people, but they're struggling. That's not an easy thing to do. They share with you their energy and their time and their suffering, and then that enhances you. And then I can only imagine what this Miss Crawford lady felt about the whole experience, having 4 people push her up a hill.
She was elate. Like, when I tell you, for weeks after the race, like, she actually took me out to she was like, by the way, side note, she's UT's University of Texas like biggest fan. She actually like won. There was like a segment on Sports Center, like biggest like super fans across the country of collegiate sports, and she won. Like, she was like cool. The biggest super fan. But she took me out to a UT basketball game, and like everybody that we ran into, she's like, hey, guess what he did? He pushed me for 26.2 miles in the Austin Marathon. I'm 210 pounds, and he pushed me the whole way. Like, dude, it lit her up, and that was really a big source of my motivation. Was just like the amount of joy that she got out of it, like, because she otherwise wouldn't get to participate in something like that. So
well, even to think, because she didn't run it technically, but just the idea in someone in her shoes who has a disability that can't run it, to know like you can kind of have, it's like a proverbial, people are with you, but to literally have 4 people physically pushing you up a hill and suffering immensely for it, that's powerful for her in a way that we probably can't understand. And maybe we're blessed for not being able to understand that, because that means that we can actually be capable of doing it. So once again, thank you for sharing that. That's such a powerful story. One of the things I wanted to ask you, let me wrap that up. That's like one of the best lessons you could ever learn from like that experience as a lesson in and of itself makes running worth it, or doing anything of the sort.
That race came with many lessons, and one of them was, hey, if you call on God, he might answer. Like that, I don't really like pray very often, I'll admit. I would like to more, but in that moment, it was just like so abundantly clear that my prayer was answered. And it was a blessing to have that like visceral experience, to where like I know that happened. I don't have to like make believe or like try and convince myself that it happened. Like, I just know the depth of my core what happened for me. And there was another part of that race was like, she kept giving me praise, like, oh, isn't he amazing, isn't he an angel? And I do like a pretty good job of just deflecting it, like, oh no, like I would make jokes, and people are extra, people are there to support runners on the race, and they see somebody pushing a wheelchair, they're like extra supportive.
Yeah.
And I'm not really one to be like, I'm obviously not doing that for my own, look at me. I'm not like taking selfies and like, look at me, am I amazing?
Yeah.
But by the end of that race, I was actually convinced that I was amazing, because she kept saying it, people kept saying it, and I was so like emotionally broken and like physically and psychologically exhausted that I could no longer deflect, and I just had to accept that these people were actually inspired by what I was doing that day. So by the end of it, it was like a big confidence boost for me that like, hey, I can actually receive this praise and take it because I'm doing something that's pretty cool. So that race came with many lessons.
So harken back to the comment on responsibility. Why did you get praised? Because of the burden that you bared. Right? Exactly. Like the literal weight that you carried, that you pushed. So, and I think there's a direct correlation between that, because you chose to do that. You chose to undertake that suffering willingly. You could have said no. You could have not run the race. You could have ran it and not pushed her. The people that were praising you recognized the fact that you just bore this burden, or bared this burden, however you say that. And that is, in my opinion, God or the universe's way of saying, well done. Like, you actually just did a good thing. So it's interesting to hear you take that as a lesson, like how to receive praise properly. When you especially feel that you actually deserve it.
Right.
Because that is a phenomenal feat, and the vast majority of people will never experience something like that. So it's good to hear that you were able to not play like the humility card, like recognize the fact, dude, I
tried.
Yeah, well, yeah, because you're a humble person. You're not. It would take a strange person to be like, you guys are right. Yeah, you're right, lady. I am amazing. But in the moment at the end, you're probably like, upon reflection, you're like, wow, maybe they were actually genuinely inspired by what I just did, which is so cool. That's also not a lesson I think a lot of people have the opportunity to learn, because not many people, in my opinion, I don't think a lot of praise is really earned. I really don't. I think a lot of it's arbitrary social formality. It's like, oh, good job on that. You don't even know what I did, or you really don't even care. But when somebody met you at the finish line of that race, I don't know if you have anybody in particular, but I can imagine somebody saying, hey, dude, what you just did was legitimately amazing. The reason that it would be so emotionally riveting and weighted, like the weight of the emotional aspect of that moment is so profound, because that is warranted praise, which to me is interesting.
I want to make the distinction here that I think what you're saying is on the money, and there's a distinction here between, like, it gets into this conversation of worthiness that I often like toss around in my head. Like, there's a big push nowadays for, like, you know, self-love and like, I'm worthy of this and I'm worthy of that. But like, are you? So it's my personal belief and my faith through God that everybody is worthy of the love of God and of love of themselves. But we do have this ego thing that's like, you know, a useful mechanism for like, hey, if I've been a lazy piece of shit for the past week, I'm not going to be worthy of like taking a week off. You know, like there's a fine line there that I think some people, you know, I think it's important not to tie too much of my worthiness to like the things that I actually do. Like, oh, I'm not worthy because I started a business and, you know, I made money. That doesn't necessarily make me a more valuable person than the next guy on the street when it comes to like universal love of God for me. But at the same time, what you said there about, you know, there were people that came up to me after the race and were like, hey man, I appreciate what you did, like you inspired me. And it wasn't like this social formality, good job bud, pat on the back. It was like, I felt like they were really seeing me. Like they were really witnessing, either they just run their own race and like we shared, there's a immense value in shared suffering. Like suffering loves company for a reason. We do it better in a pack, in a tribe. And I think that's actually a big draw to the ultra community for me, and probably for a lot of people, is getting to viscerally feel like I can be really strong, but also at times really vulnerable, because like this is so terrible. But I can also be seen by the community around me for like what I'm doing. I'm actually like being witnessed for what I'm doing and who I am and what I'm trying to be. And that's like a huge draw for me to the ultra community that is just so supportive. Like when you go to any marathon race, you're gonna have, you know, some people that are just like happy to be there, a lot of people that are like trying to hit their time and like really serious and really focused. There's not a whole lot of community there. It's like I feel very supported doing a city marathon. But when I think of like an ultra marathon space, it's like everybody just wants to see you finish. Even if I might like play around with some competition in my head, like, oh, I want to beat this guy, I want to beat this person. Like, just to clarify, I've never run an ultra race that has been sanctioned, so I don't know this for sure. But when I see somebody like Courtney DeWalter, if you're familiar with Sally McRae, she's a BPN athlete who's also ultra runner. She goes by Yellow Runner is her like alias. She's also very inspiring, and I'm also fascinated by these women who do this.
Courtney DeWalter, for anybody that doesn't know that's listening, is an absolute savage.
She's a savage, dude.
I think she beats men by like hours.
And it's so, I love her like nonchalant.
Drinks
like,
beer, eats pizza.
I eat nachos, and like they're like having her on the pod, like, what's your training regimen? She's like, I listen to my body. And they're like, their mind is blown. because they can't comprehend that she's like this savage. But when I like those two women that I just mentioned, Sally McRae being the other one, they're like, and you can see them as competitors, like they might compete in the same races, but they're also like good friends. Like there's a video that Sally McRae posted of Courtney DeWalter running the like Western States 100, and it was like, she was just like cheering her on, like, you go girl, do your thing, Courtney. And I was like, damn, that's the energy that I like to be around, is like intense support. Like, you know, if you play baseball, so you're on a team, like, you know that there's like something about like when like you can really put your energy into supporting somebody else, that is just like so wholesome and so energizing to me. I think that's, you know, part of also what I'm looking to get from this ultra community, is like people who are like really in my foxhole. They're like gonna hold it down for me.
I want to bookmark the comment you just made about like the ultra and how you can really be seen, and talk about a moment of my baseball career that immediately came to mind when you talked about intense support. Like the word intense. I have this, so I closed the baseball game against UNC at UNC in the regional. So playoff baseball, we weren't a Power 5. I played at VCU my 5th year, and A10 champs, 41-20 at that time. We felt that we were the best team in that regional. We beat Georgia on Friday night, Power 5 SEC team. Second game of the tournament, we play UNC, who had just won there, so it's the winner's bracket. Winner goes on to the championship of the regional, and it's the 9th inning. We're up by 3. I give up a 2-run home run. I walk 2 guys. Long story short, I get it done. Most intense athletic endeavor I've ever been in. Most nervous I've ever been. Most excited I've ever been. The highlight of my baseball career. One of the most real experiences, and when I say real, I mean like I knew in that moment that I was alive, and like to the nth degree. 4,000 people that are rooting for UNC yelling at me like, hey, you suck, like just so much cool emotion. And the moment that I'm thinking of is after there's a video of it, after the guy pops out, game ends, I'm like, let's go. And the support was so intense from my teammates, and I'll show you this video afterwards. I mean physically intense, like they're like slapping me and like butting me, but it's a physical representation of what you're talking about. It's like, that was legitimately intense support, where they were like so intense that they're fucking throwing their bodies at me in support of me. And it might sound like counterintuitive, but it was the most, I look back at that video with so much joy and so much pride in that team and being a part of that team, the shared adversity we'd gone through all year long, starting out 3-9, and just the whole endeavor. You talk about shared adversity. It's like they were, in that moment, we were all like sharing the adversity and the triumph. So it's just really cool, and I totally understand what you're saying about intense support. It's not some pat on the butt like, hey man, good run, not hey, good rate. No, it's like, I'm sure there are people in ultra races, I've never run one, as you might be able to tell, that are like legitimately pouring themselves, like their actual selves, into you in that moment, so that you can, I believe there's something to it, I don't know the metaphysics of it all, but if I genuinely pour my energy into you, you will receive it. Like you can use somebody else's energy in a moment. I believe that to be true with my whole entire being. And so I just had to share that story about, as soon as you said intense support, I literally immediately thought of my teammates like shouldering me, and I'm like, but it's just cool.
That's great, dude. No, that's a great example. Props for closing it out.
Dude, there was a time, man, because like I said, give up that 2-run home run, and we're down by 1. I'm like, okay, bro, like let's, with 2 outs too. I'm like, got 1 out, man. Let's figure it out. Like, present, smooth, aggressive. That's what I always tell myself. Present, smooth, aggressive. Stay present. Stay smooth. Let's stay aggressive here. Walk the next guy. I'm like, whatever, dude. Walk the next guy. I'm like, okay, bro, you need to figure some shit out. You're about to lose this game for your team, man. And then we won. But it was awesome. It was a cool experience. Thank you for allowing me to share that. I just like relived that.
I think that's I think a missing piece. There's been a lot of attention to like men's mental health, like disproportionate rates of suicide is disproportionately men. Mass shooters, most all the time, are men. Like there's a big proponent of what men are missing in their day-to-day lives is like a band of brothers, like a group of guys around them that can support them in times of like intensity and adversity, and also like when you lose the game, like you're still gonna be your homies.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if you lost the very next game for the team, they're still gonna see you and love you and, you know, be in integrity with you. I think we mentioned a few times in this podcast like our tribal roots. Like if we're in a tribe, like our boys are the boys. Like that's
ride or die. Like
ride or die, dude. There's something I have found so healing about being in a group of men and being able to like make fun of each other, like in a way that is like, I'm actually making fun of you, you're actually making fun of me, in a way that other people might seem like that is like fucked up what you're saying, but because we're laughing about it, for me it's a good practice to not take myself too seriously. And going back to what we were saying about like carrying it lightly, is like that's when my boys can give me shit about the thing that I thought in my head was so terrible, I feel better about it. So
that's that locker room talk.
Yeah, that locker room talk, dude.
Some of my favorite, like the hardest I might have ever laughed, and obviously not everybody's in a locker room. Locker room's kind of proverbial. It's like there's a ton of locker rooms. It's just an environment with a bunch of guys that are working towards the same thing. And some of my hardest laughs in my life are literally just shit talking my teammates and then shit talking me, to the point where it's like almost disgusting looking back at like just the severity of some of these insults, and you're like, wait, this is hilarious. But it needs to be said, and it needs to be it's a good reminder that it's a powerful insight into like taking it lightly. And nobody likes the sourpuss, right? Nobody likes that guy who's like, you say one thing and they like freak out. It's like, that's not really, what's the word, that's not a good way to become a part of a team or a tribe. So accepting that, like, sort of, there is a comical part of all of us, like that from the outside. If somebody looked into like some of the things that I deal with, they'd probably be like, you're fucking hilarious. And I'm saying this for you, but I want to bookmark, or go back to the bookmark of the ultras, and sort of something that you said, be seen. Like that's a really interesting choice of words right there. Do you think she needs some water?
If you have it, sure.
Oh no, I got some ants in my coffee. Pause.
I probably got a jet in like 15 minutes.
Okay, cool.
Getting Lila some water over here.
Mission complete. But the point about being seen, that's an interesting choice of words in my opinion, because the ultra, as it stands to me, I think any adversity can be, or any journey rather, the ultra is kind of just a condensed journey. I look at jiu-jitsu, for me, it's a journey. Baseball's a journey. All these things. But for some reason, ultras, because they are like finite, like an ultra race is, like a jiu-jitsu journey is a extended period of time. An ultra is literally just like hours that stack up on top of each other, and then it's done in that instant. It's like a microcosm of life, and that there are literally, depending on the race, there's going to be hills, there's going to be ups and downs, there's going to be peaks, and there's going to be valleys. There's going to be light and there's going to be darkness. There's going to be times of immense triumph, like you get to the top of the hill, you feel, oh my gosh, and then literally 30 minutes later you're like questioning your existence. And you talk about being seen in a community, especially if you run with people in races. I'm sure that there is like a legitimate sense of vulnerability, but also, I'm trying to think how to word that, like the actual act of being seen in that vulnerable state. I think that's like more or less what you're referring to in terms of like the community. I think that's so cool, because very rarely do we, in today's world, to go back to our tribalism comment, you would see people in their most vulnerable state daily in a battle, and trying to hunt and failing miserably, being very successful in a hunt, losing a loved one, all these things. You see these people for who they are all the time, so they are seen and they feel seen, and you're actually seeing them. Today, I'm looking at an apartment building, like you go in your apartment after you lose somebody, your friends probably don't even get to see you, actually see you. You win something, you go into your apartment, you go to your house, you don't actually get seen a lot of the time. So to have people that you actually go through the ups and downs of life, I mean like physically, not just over the internet, like in the moment that they happen, that in my experience, to a lesser degree than an ultra, obviously, has been immensely gratifying.
Yeah, well said, man. That's, I think, a big piece of the why for me at least. I would presume for a lot of people, consciously or not, is like they want to be seen, they want to be supported, and we all do. It's, you know, it takes a little bit of a crazy motherfucker to like go out and run that much. Like I said, it's not always enjoyable, but it's certainly worth it if you get the opportunity.
We've got a handful of minutes left. I want to kind of tie it up with like your shirt, the dog training stuff, full spectrum dog training.
That's me.
It's really two-fold question, and I have one question that I want to ask at the end. First question on the dog training, to like sort of tie that back in, is what have you learned about yourself through working with our lovely canine companions? What have you learned through that process about yourself in life?
Good question. This is like, if you find me at any, I don't go to many parties, but if you find me, this is usually what I'm talking about. Most of the parties you can find me at, everyone's like in deep conversation. I'm like, yeah, this is just like dog training, dude. This is like just like how you see yourself.
Have you seen that meme where it's like the guy standing in the corner, it's like a little stick figure, and it's like everybody dancing, and he's
Yeah.
like, why are they not talking about dog training?
Yeah,
Like,
for sure, that's me. You know, I always tell people dogs are, you know, it's often said that dogs take after their owners. That is partially true. I think they're more so a mirror for the information that you're giving them. But what I have learned personally is that I was not as like composed as I thought I was. You can't train a dog if you're frustrated. Like if you're like really upset, if you're like being overly emotional, there's a time to be emotional with your dog. That is a big piece of the relationship, is like knowing how to tune in an emotional. Dogs are more attuned to our emotional states than any other animal, and that's an important piece of the puzzle. But like when your focus and your goal is to teach them something or to train them, if I get like upset that they're not performing the way that I think they should, and that has been a big lesson for me, is to not get my ego wrapped up in how the dog is doing or how I think they should be doing. It's been a master class in, you know, trying to make myself more calm, cool, collected, you know, with a focus. And this is something that my mentor taught me, really drove home for me, is like, go in with a plan, but be willing to change it at a moment's notice. Because you can only do what the dog is ready for or what they're capable of doing. And so like I could have an idea in my head, like, we're gonna go out and we're gonna work on recalls today. And the dog's just like not engaged at all. They're just don't care about what I'm doing, don't care about what I have to offer them. Okay, let's do something else. Let's work on your placement, let's work on your routine, let's try something else. So I think those are, you know, two of the bigger lessons that I've learned, is, you know, how to be self-aware and not, you know, overly attached to like an outcome. Trying not to get too like personally flustered by like the performance of a dog. It's an animal, so it's good for me to be reminded that, you know, they're creatures that live in the moment, and I can only do what's best for them in that moment. And then also to have a clear plan, and I try to apply that to my life, like have a clear goal, a clear objective, a clear like place where I'm trying to get to, but if something takes me off course, like be ready to adjust.
Very cool. I think that's pretty profound, because it's, like you mentioned, it's a mirror. So it's also, just like I think everything, like I mentioned, it's kind of like a representation of many things of life. It's like being patient with, like we're talking about the person that we like and dislike about ourselves. The dog can be viewed in the same way. It's like there's parts of your dog that you maybe like that it does well, and then there's parts that don't. So it's like, how are you responding to both of those? Are you being graceful with that part? If you're not,
are you ignoring that part?
Exactly.
Are you on your phone while your dog's pulling on the leash and going after other dogs? Are you like literally just not paying attention? That's probably like, you know, my own projection of that, but that's perfect. That's a big reason why I got into dog training, because I'm like, look at what it can show you about your life. Like, are you not if you struggle to have a boundary with your dog, do you have trouble putting a boundary on yourself or your partner or your family? There's so many insights and deep wisdom, and a lot of it really, I can talk conceptually about it all day, but the real learning comes from being with the dogs and, you know, being present with yourself. Like we said, there's so much information out there, but, you know, you can get knowledge from information, but you get wisdom from experience.
Yep.
So you just gotta get in there and do it.
Well said. The last question regarding dog training is, do you have, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, do you have like a handful, 3 to 5 tips for somebody like right out of the gate that's either thinking about getting a dog, or maybe they have a dog like Lila who's 8 years old, and in terms of training, maybe they've never gotten them trained or actually looked into training? Do you have any tips for any dog owners?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of things you can do, but I think the biggest bang for your buck for me, well, firstly, the first thing you need to do is figure out what motivates your dog. You know, my lab, Ziggy, would do crazy shit for kibble. He would do backflips for kibble for the first like 8 months of his life. Would just go crazy, literally kibble. And so I could use that. My oldest dog, Hopper, the golden retriever, like would turn his nose. And so you got to figure out, what do they like? Now that you figured out what's motivating them, whether it's like your praise or your food or the toy, your movement, use that. And, you know, I'd say that the second thing is to play with them. Like, that is, to me, I didn't even touch on this at all, but that's like the biggest, also like one of my biggest takeaways from my dog training school is that, like, when you look at what we consider professional dogs, like military dogs, police canines, search and rescue dogs, they are all doing that job for a toy, provided it's, a lot of the bite work dogs really like to bite, but even that starts as a game. Like, they teach them how to bite properly on a toy. That tug toy then becomes a sleeve that they're holding, then all of a sudden the sleeve's on the arm, now it's on the leg, oh look, you're biting a person. So by playing with your dog, not only is it a kind of laboratory to figure out what makes my dog tick, like when I can get my dog, like Leo, my rescue, now that we have this play relationship and I give him the cues and he's locked in, like, to have a dog giving you their like 100% focus with determination to figure out what you're trying to get them to do, like, because they want it so bad, and it builds a relationship like nothing else will, is playing with your dog, which can sound, you know, very simple and very, like, you know, simple advice, like play with your dog. Yeah, I toss the ball and, you know, I sit back, and like I said, every dog's different, but, you know, a play relationship is like one of the bigger things that I encourage my clients to do, is to play with your dog, because they're going to love you for it, first and foremost. You can figure out a lot about them through play. Another thing that I would recommend putting your investment in is teaching your dog a good recall. So like I said, I'm writing that ebook and hope to have that out soon, but it's, you know, I think the most valuable tool that a person can have is putting a good investment like early on to make your dog not only like excited about the recall, but determined to do the recall. Especially like
for clarification, recall being
come when I call you.
Yep.
Recall being come when I call you. Yeah.
Something that every dog owner
who wants to unclip the leash should have a flawless recall, in my opinion, and most do not. And that's, you know, it's not the end of the world, but it can also be a safety thing. Like, hey, we're hanging out. There's parks around Austin, man, that are, you know, off leash and not fenced in, and right next to a road.
Zilker is one of them.
Zilker is one of them. And Auditorium Shores has an off-leash dog area that's not fenced in, and, you know, there's squirrels around, there's cars, there's things that can be dangerous to a dog. And like, if I say Ziggy come, like, he's gonna do it. And that's just like, that's also such a reassuring feeling. Not only is it cool, it's reassuring and like builds a lot of trust. I can let him kind of do his thing a little bit, but if I say the word, like, he's gonna do it, because I put a lot of motivation and drive to do it early on. And like 95% of the work was like, I'm gonna make this the most fun thing that you'll do today. And then also, hey, you're obliged to do it. By the way, it's not optional, right? So that's like.
By the way, you're gonna come.
By the way, it's you're gonna come. And so that's where I would put a lot of the weight. And beyond that, like it's pretty, you know, I teach them. All right, I'll give one more like rounded out tip. Is that one of the most often things that people fail to do is, and you're gonna say, dude, this sounds obvious, so simple, is like teach your dog how to walk on a leash. And what I mean by that is teach them how to respond to the leash as information, not just as a tether that's attached to them. So dog over there, for example, the leash is on, dog's on a harness, definitely not paying attention to the girl that is walking the dog. And that's
sorry,
like,
girl.
That's the default for most people who like, okay, we're gonna go on a walk. Like, they never teach the dog how to walk nicely, how to like be in a heel position. What is that? How do I, you know, does the dog, like they have something, I won't get too deep into it, but they have something called an opposition reflex. If I give them pressure one way, they're gonna oppose it. So what you wanna do is teach them how to respond to that pressure, and so that they can, you know, it becomes a hey, I guide you around with this tool. And like horses, pretty quickly you can guide very strong, very powerful dogs with your pinky. Like, oh, they're just because they've learned the system of, oh, I follow the leash, I don't just ignore it and pull against it and choke myself for the entire walk. So you can make your life a lot easier by shaping up your recall and teaching your dog how to walk nicely on a leash. And that's maybe easier said than done, but
sure.
You know,
but it's somewhere to start. Yeah, reach out. Do you do like remote training or anything like that at all?
Yeah, I do some remote training. I find that it's sometimes easier with people that I've already worked with in person,
sure,
so that they can have some like foundational understanding that we can build on. But yeah, I do remote training, and a lot of it is like troubleshooting, you know, and a lot of it, sometimes it's like the tools that they're using aren't effective, or the environment is tricky. There's different variables that, you know, I see all the time. So for me, yeah, I do some remote work, whether that's over Zoom or phone call or whatever, but I'm also, you know, in person around the Austin area.
Very cool. Very cool. I appreciate those tips. I think that those will actually be pretty helpful to people with dogs and people thinking about getting dogs, specifically the latter, because then they'll kind of know what to do from the beginning. And you mentioned ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure.
Yeah.
The last question, in keeping with the Tyro experience, I'm not sure how familiar you are with like what that is, but, and I say this every podcast, so sorry for people listening. But a Tyro is a novice or beginner in the modern language. It stems from young soldier in Latin, somebody who just entered the military. And the way that I perceive it, the way that I define it, what Tyro means to me is someone who is in an arena. Reference to the very famous Teddy Roosevelt speech, Man in the Arena. A Tyro is somebody that's in the arena picking up their sword and like running towards the middle, like fighting, right? So my question to you to round this out is, what arena are you in? What are you running towards? What are you picking up your sword and screaming at, like ready to take out?
So this is a great question. And right now, I mean, I could talk about the ultras, I could talk about the dog training, I've got a few other things in my life, but the first thing that came to me is actually like putting myself out there on social media, like online. I only recently realized how afraid I was of other people's judgment of me. I got like one bad review on my Google site. There's just like a sea of 5-star reviews, and then there's like, I had this experience with a guy that was unfortunate, I won't get into, but like that was kind of hard for me. And like, I always take myself to be somebody who's like doesn't really care what other people think, but because I felt like it now represents me as a business and what I do and how I help people, I'm really pushing myself to be like unabashedly myself online. So this is like the first step to me doing that, is doing this podcast.
Very cool.
Get myself out there, talking more, put myself in front of a camera more often. So you'll see a lot more content on TikTok and Instagram for me, because that's my arena right now, is learning how to navigate that social media space with doing more creating than consuming. That's been a big challenge for me, is like trying not to get sucked into the algorithm, but you know, use it as a tool for me to dispense my wisdom and marketing and, you know, helping people and getting good info. There's a lot of dog training information out there. Like a little sliver of it is what I would consider like good information. So instead of like hating on the game, right? About like, man, look at all these people with fucking like 1.5 million TikTok followers, and I disagree almost completely with a lot of the stuff that they're teaching about dogs. Instead of like, you know, hating on that from the outside, I'm gonna get myself into the game and then, you know, put myself out there in a way that's gonna reach a ton of people, and also be backed with my own knowledge of what is actual like good solid information for people to grasp onto. So that's my arena right now.
Right on. Our arenas are now so much different. And I will tell you this, with the podcast, with Twitter, Instagram, I've relatively recently, last few months, really started focusing on that exact what you just said. Using social media to create rather than being used by it, consuming. So, and that's a theme on this podcast. I talked about that several times with several different guests, several of which have utilized social media to create phenomenal lives for themselves and also impact people very positively. So I think that's a worthy arena to be in. I think there's also something to be said. People might find that funny, like listening, they might be like, oh, putting yourself out there on social media. There's a difference to me between posting a picture of you in a suit, or you running a marathon, be like, great race, that type of stuff. But actually putting yourself on a platform, exposing your thoughts, exposing what you think on dog training, what you think the best this is, what you think the best that is, and slowly unveiling different parts of yourself on social media, it is a lot more challenging than you think, because you really realize really quickly how many things you're like, oh, I'm going to post this, and then you get to the post button, you're like, I don't know, because this person might think that's weird, or this and that. So I think that's a worthy arena. I think that you have the personality, the charisma, and the knowledge. Like I want to talk to you off air about Twitter. I think you could use Twitter like really, really, really well. Could lead to a lot of good business for you and connections. But yeah, man, to round it out, I appreciate you coming on, man. This has been a phenomenal conversation.
Thanks for having me, man. It's a blast.
Yeah, it's outside. Got 2 hours of grounding.
Let's
got
go.
to pet some dogs.
Yeah.
Got to sweat a little bit, have some good conversation, man. And people can find you at
Full Spectrum Canine on Instagram, or Nick, my first and last name, Nick.Moccia, Moccia, on Instagram. And yeah, Full Spectrum Canine is my business. Find me on Google and find me on Instagram. Hit me up.
Right on, man.
Yeah.